The night I got a call from jail. I didn't do it. My brother cried. What he told me next left me questioning everything. It was a Thursday evening, one of those quiet nights when you can actually feel the stillness in the air. I'd kicked back with a glass of wine, finally sinking into the peace I rarely got in my own home. My job as a nurse kept me on my toes, and these little moments were rare treasures. I had my book open, a mystery novel I was halfway through, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Unknown caller. I almost ignored it. Most of the time, these were spam calls or someone asking about insurance. But for some reason, I picked up, expecting a quick, "No, thank you," and to be back to my evening. Instead, a familiar voice came through, shaky, frantic. "Anya? Oh, God, Anya, please, you have to help me," the voice whispered, as though it barely had strength to even reach me through the line. I recognized it instantly. "Ryan? What's going on?" I sat up, suddenly alert. "Where are you?" "I'm at the county jail." His voice trembled. "Anya, you gotta believe me, I didn't do it." My heart stopped. "The county jail?" I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to steady myself. "Didn't do what?" I asked, struggling to understand. "What in the world is going on?" He let out a shaky breath. "They arrested me. They think I stole money. From work. But I didn't. I swear to you, Anya, I didn't do it. Someone set me up." I tried to process what he was saying, but it felt like my mind was moving through molasses. My little brother, my reckless, occasionally idiotic brother, was calling me from jail. Ryan worked for a logistics company in town, a fairly simple job that mostly paid his bills. He'd been there maybe a year, and we'd had a long talk recently about how he was finally getting his life together. How was he now the prime suspect in a fraud case? "Ryan," I began slowly, trying to keep my voice calm, "you're telling me they think you stole money from your job?" "Yeah. They said I've been siphoning off funds, moving them into some offshore account or whatever, and that I set it up with fake invoices and emails." His voice broke, and I could hear him fighting back tears. "But, Anya, I didn't touch a cent. You know me." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure I did know him. Ryan had always been complicated. There was the time he'd maxed out our mother's credit card accidentally, or when he'd bought a motorcycle on a whim and crashed it 3 days later. But stealing from his job? That was another level entirely. "Look, I'll come down," I said finally, trying to steady myself. "Just sit tight, okay? I'll be there soon." I hung up, threw on a jacket, and drove to the county jail in a daze. The city lights blurred as I gripped the steering wheel, questions buzzing in my head. I couldn't believe this was happening. Ryan always made poor choices, sure, but this? When I arrived, the officer at the desk didn't so much as blink when I asked to see him. She just led me into a small, stuffy room with white walls and one metal table. Ryan shuffled in a few minutes later, his hands cuffed in front of him, and I barely recognized him. He looked pale, dark circles under his eyes, his normally confident face worn down by something I'd never seen on him before, fear. "Anya," he breathed, sitting across from me. "I'm so glad you came." "Don't thank me yet," I replied, crossing my arms and fixing him with a stare. "What in the hell is going on?" He looked down, fiddling with the metal cuff around his wrist. "They think I stole money. Thousands, from the company. They say it's all there, in emails and transfers that point right to me. But it's not true. Someone's framing me, I know it." I took a breath, leaning closer. "Framing you? And why would someone want to do that, Ryan?" Ryan glanced around, as though someone might be listening. "It's Paul," he whispered finally, his voice tense. "Paul Templeton, one of the senior managers. I've seen him do weird stuff before, Anya, moving around funds, talking about side accounts. I never really questioned it, thought it was just office politics. But I think he's the one behind all of this." "Paul Templeton?" I frowned. "You think he set you up to take the fall? How would he even pull that off?" Ryan shrugged, frustration etched into his face. "I don't know. He's got connections, I guess, and he's been with the company forever. I'm the new guy, who's gonna believe me over him." "Have you told anyone this?" I asked, watching his face closely. I wanted to believe him, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just another one of Ryan's schemes that had gone horribly wrong. He shook his head. "Who would I tell? It'd be my word against his. They have all this evidence they say leads to me. I swear, Anya, I didn't touch that money." I studied his face. The guilt, the fear, it seemed genuine. But then again, I'd been wrong about Ryan before. He'd put on the same remorseful face in the past, and each time, he'd let me down. "All right," I said finally, after a long silence. "I'll find you a lawyer. But you need to be honest with me, Ryan. Completely honest. No secrets, no surprises. Do you understand?" He nodded, relief flashing across his face. "Thank you, Anya." I didn't know who else to call. The following days were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and late-night calls with the lawyer, a no-nonsense man named Mr. Lee. He was thorough, but he didn't give any false hope, which, I supposed, was his job. "If your brother's telling the truth, we'll find the evidence to prove it," he said to me one afternoon. "But it won't be easy." Ryan moved in with me while we sorted out the mess. His bail had been set, and between me, our mother, and my partner Lucas, we managed to cover it, barely. Lucas had been incredibly supportive, but even he had his limits. I could feel the strain in our conversations, the worry in his eyes when he looked at me. One evening, I sat with Ryan on the couch, surrounded by stacks of documents. I'd been combing through emails, invoices, anything that might hold a clue. Mr. Lee had managed to get hold of some of the company records, and I was slowly piecing together a picture of what had been going on in Ryan's office. There were strange inconsistencies, random invoice numbers, accounts that seemed to lead nowhere. But nothing definitive. "Ryan," I said, turning to him. "Are you absolutely sure there's nothing else? No skeletons you forgot to mention?" He looked at me, hurt flashing across his face. "Anya, I swear. I may be a screw-up, but I'm not a criminal. I'd never do this to you." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and I felt a pang of guilt for doubting him. But it was hard not to, given our history. A week later, just as I was beginning to lose hope, I stumbled across something strange. It was an email, buried deep in the pile of records. The message was vague, almost cryptic, but it was addressed from Paul to someone with a private email address. The subject line read, "Adjustment to Project Blue." The email itself was equally murky. "Funds have been moved as per agreement. Ensure the documentation is correct this time." It was signed only with his initials, PT. I leaned back, my heart racing. What was Project Blue? And why did it sound like something he was trying to cover up? "Ryan," I called, my voice barely a whisper. "You have to see this." He came over, squinting at the screen. When he saw the email, his eyes widened. "I knew it," he muttered. "Paul was doing something shady. I saw him stay late a couple of times, but I thought it was just because he's a workaholic." I nodded, excitement mingling with a sense of dread. "If we can link this to the missing money, it could be our proof. But it's not enough on its own." Mr. Lee was cautious when I showed him the email. "It's something," he admitted, "but we'll need a lot more to build a defense." The next few days were a whirlwind. I reached out to anyone who might have worked with Paul, even employees who had left the company. Most people were hesitant to talk, but one night, I got a call from a former accountant who had worked with Paul 2 years ago. Her name was Marta, and she sounded nervous, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look, I don't know how much I can say," she began, "but Paul was always involved in side activities. Moving funds, creating dummy accounts for projects that didn't exist. People knew about it, but nobody said anything. He's protected." "Protected by who?" I asked, gripping the phone. Marta hesitated. "Upper management. The company. It has ties to people who don't want questions asked. Be careful, okay?" I was shaken after that call with Marta. The stakes felt much higher than I'd thought. If Paul was protected, and his shady dealings ran deep, then this was about more than clearing Ryan's name. It was about going up against powerful people who didn't want anyone asking questions. But my brother's future was on the line, and I knew I couldn't back down. I spent the next day digging even deeper, poring over everything I could find. By evening, I'd found a few more emails that hinted at Paul's scheme. He'd been rerouting funds under fake projects and then quietly closing those accounts. I printed out everything and sent it to Mr. Lee, hoping it was enough to get us somewhere. That night, I barely slept, thoughts racing through my mind, wondering if this was all some wild goose chase. But I knew it was our best shot. 2 days later, Mr. Lee called me. "Anya," he said, a note of excitement in his voice, "I think we've got something. The emails you found, along with a few things I've pulled up, might be enough to prove that Ryan was set up." "What do we need to do now?" I asked, heart pounding. "Gather everything you've got, and we'll go directly to the company's board of directors," he replied. "If Paul has been stealing money and blaming it on others, we can force them to confront him. They won't want a scandal." The plan was risky, but it was all we had. That weekend, Mr. Lee arranged a meeting with the company's board. It was held at a sleek office downtown, a cold, intimidating place with shiny glass walls and polished floors. Ryan, Mr. Lee, and I walked in together, clutching our evidence like a lifeline. When we were finally ushered into the boardroom, a group of stern-looking executives sat around a long, dark table. Paul was there too, sitting comfortably at the head of the table, looking smug, like he was untouchable. One of the directors, an older man with sharp eyes, glanced at us. "Mr. Lee, we're here to discuss a complaint, correct?" "Yes," Mr. Lee replied, his voice steady. "But it's more than a complaint. It's evidence of serious financial misconduct involving Mr. Templeton." He slid the stack of emails, invoices, and documents across the table. Paul's face paled, but he quickly regained his composure. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed. "These documents don't prove anything. If anything, they implicate Ryan, who's already a suspect." "Actually, Paul," I said, unable to hold back, "they show that you've been moving money around for fake projects. We have emails signed with your initials, accounts that lead back to you. Ryan's just your scapegoat." Paul's eyes flashed with anger. "This is nonsense," he spat, trying to dismiss us. "I'd never jeopardize the company's finances. I'm a trusted senior manager." One of the board members raised a hand. "Let's see what Mr. Lee has to say." Mr. Lee calmly explained the paper trail we'd uncovered. He laid out the details, how Paul had set up dummy accounts, created fake invoices, and quietly funneled money away under projects like Blue and Green. And each of these projects had been carefully scrubbed to look like mistakes from Ryan's department. Mr. Lee ended his case with Marta's statement, confirming that Paul had been doing this for years. By the end of it, the room was silent. Paul's smug confidence had crumbled, and he was shifting uncomfortably in his chair. One of the board members looked at him with clear disgust. "Paul, we'll need a moment to discuss this among ourselves. Please wait outside." Paul glared at us before storming out. The board talked in hushed voices for what felt like hours. Finally, they called us back in. The director looked at Ryan, then at Mr. Lee. "We've come to a decision," he said. "Given the evidence presented, it's clear that Mr. Templeton has been involved in serious misconduct. We will initiate an internal investigation to confirm everything, but we are prepared to drop the charges against Ryan immediately." Relief flooded through me. Ryan's face lit up with gratitude, and he squeezed my hand under the table. "But there's one more thing," I said, my voice firm. "Ryan's reputation has been damaged, and he's been through hell because of Paul. This needs to be made right publicly." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, the director nodded. "We will issue a statement clearing Ryan's name, and Mr. Templeton will be terminated if the investigation confirms his actions." When we left that office, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and triumph. Paul was done for. All his arrogance and manipulation had finally caught up with him. A few weeks later, I heard that he'd been fired, and that the company was pursuing legal action against him for embezzlement. Ryan's charges were dropped, and his name was cleared. The company's statement went public, and they even offered Ryan a formal apology. But the sweetest part? Rumor had it Paul's wife had left him when she found out the truth, and he was forced to sell his house to cover his legal fees. He'd lost everything he thought he'd keep hidden. Ryan and I sat in my living room a few days later, toasting with cheap wine. "To justice," he grinned, clinking his glass against mine. I smiled back. "To family," I said. "And to making sure the truth finally came out."